Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our study in the book of Revelation. I am at home doing our lesson tonight because the air conditioning in our church is out. Excuse me. And so rather than watching you watch me sweat while I give the lesson tonight, I thought, well, we'll just do it from home again. And I know it's familiar to those of you who have been keeping up with the study because we've done it from home for a while. But at any rate, air conditioning should be fixed soon at our church. Our construction continues as well, and hopefully you'll see a big difference next week, and we continue on. So we are in the book of Revelation, and we are getting into chapter 17. So in chapter 16, what we saw were the 7 bowls of judgment that were poured out into the earth. And a great amount of destruction and death takes place and pain throughout that time period as those 7 bowls are being poured out. In chapter 17 and 18, we kind of have this little moment where we get an explanation of some things. So in chapter 16 and 19, that's a continuation, right? So when the last bowl is poured out, Jesus Christ returns. But 17 and 18 is in between those 2 chapters. And in between those 2 chapters, we get a little explanation of some things, and we see kind of how it progressed to the point that it's gotten to. And in chapter 17, we're going to talk about the false religion and how the Antichrist uses that false religion essentially to take control. And then in chapter 18, it's more about the political part of things and more about the money influence, and society point of view, all of which are going to be destroyed when Christ returns. So let's get into chapter 17. There's a lot here to unpack, and so I'm going to do my best to explain it, to communicate what I believe is going on here. And as always, I tell you at the end of every Wednesday night, if there are any questions, please feel free to contact me and let me know. Okay, so let's get into it. Then one of the 7 angels, chapter 17, verse 1. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came to me and said, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of those sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." So what we have first and foremost is we have an angel, one of the angels who poured out one of the bowls, come up to John and say these things. So there's a connection between the 7 bowls of judgment and what's being done here. But again, in chronological order, this isn't what happens next. This is kind of like a break to show us kind of how things progress to the point that they're progressing to. And the angel says, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute." So let's just stop there. So some translations say harlot, like King James, New King James will say harlot. I use the English Standard Version, so it says prostitute. There have been many speculations. Many people theorize what is the great prostitute. Some will say what's an actual prostitute. That would be in a literal sense that we look at Scripture. But then there is the allegory or the example of what is really pointing to something else. And in this case, it's really pointing to something else. The prostitute are false religions, false idols, the things that people worship that have nothing to do with God. So if we think about man was created by God for a very specific purpose, and that part of that purpose is worship. But the thing is that we are supposed to be worshiping the one true God. And what happens is that we have people who worship all these different things. They worship false gods. They worship false religions. They worship things. We don't worship doesn't have to be a deity. We don't have to worship some powerful being. Worship can be anything, and it can be geared toward anything, or focus can be on anything when it comes to worship. So, in some ways, depending on how you act and depending on what you do, you could be worshiping, your favorite hobby, your pastime. You could be worshiping a sport or sports. You can worship anything. And here the writer or the angel tells John that kind of I'm going to show you this great prostitute. And in the context of chapter 17, the great prostitute is that false religion. And at some point in time, all of these religions, that these false religions are going to melt into one, or one is going to rise above it all and everyone is going to flock to that. So we, as the creation, we look to worship something. So all these people that rejected Christ, that reject God, that seen of all the things that have taken place up to this point, continue to reject God, they will worship something totally different other than God. So the great prostitute is this false religion. Now there have been some people who speculate that it is the Roman Catholic Church. I don't believe that. Now, is it possible the Roman Catholic Church could change into something different and melt with some other religions? Anything is possible. And the same thing could be said about some Christian churches. I think that there are probably some pastors and theologians who would look at some churches and say, well, these churches really aren't Christian at all. So is it possible that we'll see Christian churches melt into this one religion? Absolutely. The Roman Catholic Church could melt into this one religion. The Muslim, Mormonism, I mean, all these different things could come together to form this one religion. But what the angel is showing John is basically this one religion that is going to develop at some point in time. And the angel says the great prostitute who is seated on many waters. So when we think about the days in this time period, when this book was written, the great cities that existed, the greatest cities, all existed by some body of water, either like Babylon on the great Euphrates, or any of the other great cities that were located near harbors or great bodies of water, ocean, seas, that sort of thing. So when it says that, it's basically saying that the prostitute is seated almost like a throne across all of these lands. Now remember, we're talking about the entire world. Now we don't know how the entire world plays into the last days. We don't know how, the Western Hemisphere, North America, South America, how all that plays into what's going to happen in those final days. Maybe by this time, it's all gone and destroyed. Maybe all that exists is this area, right? It's always possible. We just don't know. But nonetheless, the great prostitute has a wide range of that it covers. It covers the whole world. And then the angel says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality. So again, going back to that concept of all the waters, the prostitute having this far reach, but also has a great amount of influence. We see with whom the kings of the earth, that is, the leaders of the earth, have this connection with. And I'm not saying the Roman Catholic Church is the great prostitute, but I do want to use the Roman Catholic Church as an example of how things could take place. Because as we go through the study tonight, and as we go through chapter 17, and we start thinking about this religion and how influential it becomes, and how many people basically bow down to it and worship it. Like, how is that possible? Right now, we know that in the Christian church, we have such a hard time trying to get people to come to church. And we've seen a great amount of people leave the church for whatever reason. But we're seeing this kind of exodus in the Christian church right now, and it's across denominations. While there are some churches that are thriving, many are not. And so it's kind of hard to think, man, how does this happen? When the Roman Catholic Church began to form and to, in a way, take hold, of the world in that area, if you will, Europe and Eastern Asia and all that, it began to gain momentum. And so, as it gained momentum and as Christianity spread and the Catholic Church became more and more, for lack of better terms, powerful, influential. I mean, the Catholic Church had churches in all major cities. The Pope, the cardinals, the bishops, the priests, they all had a lot of influence on the leadership. And almost in a way, the Roman Catholic Church for a period, in a way, kind of ruled the world for the most part, not all of it, but for a great chunk of it, because of the influence it had in all these different areas in France and Great Britain and Germany and all of the areas in Europe. So if we kind of look at that and think about how that took place, it's easy to see how a false religion could take hold. And if we look at scripture and how it talks about at some point in time, everyone just wants to have their ear tickled. In other words, they just want to hear whatever it is that makes them feel good. So it's hard sometimes to wrap our minds around parts of Revelation, but if we just really think about it, and we look at history and we look at all these different, aspects of different religions and how influential they are, it's you can kind of start to see how all this can take place. So we have the great prostitute seated on the waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of those of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. Now, this is not a literal sense that they're all just drunk on wine. This is basically drunk on what the prostitute is giving them. In other words, that they have just basically let their minds go, that they have allowed themselves to be duped, if you will, by the prostitute, by this religion. They find great pleasure in it. They just allow the religion to do whatever it wants. And if we think about what happens when someone gets drunk, you lose a lot of ability. You lose a lot of your motor skills. You lose a lot of your rational thinking. I mean, it affects you in this really negative way, and that's what's going to happen with this great religion that's going to basically form, and everyone's going to flock to and to worship. That's just what's going to happen. And so we have these people that have done that, and then they have partaken in sexual immorality. If we go and we look again at history and we think about the Rome, the Romans, and all the things that they bow down to, which basically was just a take on the Greek gods. So they took Greek mythology and they made basically changed a few things, and now we have Rome's religion essentially, right? Zeus and all the different gods and the goddesses that they worshiped. Then they started building temples to excuse me, to Caesar, and they were worshiping the Caesar. And so we saw all of this take place, and within all of that religion, there was lots of sexual immorality. Now, what does it mean, sexual immorality? In today's world, if I put 100 people out there and I said, tell me what is sexual immorality, we'd almost get 100 different responses in today's world, because everyone has their own idea of what sexual immorality is. The question is, where's your threshold, right? So if you believe that unless you're having sexual relations with your spouse and everything outside of that is sexual immorality, someone else is going to have a different definition. They're going to say that having sex outside of marriage is not sexual immorality. Excuse me. You'll have another person that says having sex with the same gender is not sexual immorality. So it's just a matter of where is that line? Where is that threshold where you say, no, past that is sexual immorality? Where we really define as believers can be found in Leviticus chapter 17. Leviticus chapter 17 basically defines sexual immorality. Sexual immorality includes homosexual sex. It includes sex with a relative. It includes sex with children. It includes sex with animals. I mean, there's a defined list of sexual immorality. So we look at that because in the New Testament, when it talks about sexual immorality, that's what it's referring to. When Jesus talks about sexual immorality, that's what he's referring to. So this is where we have the understanding of sexual immorality is Leviticus chapter 17. So when people, excuse me again, when people say Jesus didn't talk about homosexuality, yes, he did, because when he says talks about sexual immorality, he's referring to Leviticus chapter 17. It is defined. So here we see that there is a great amount of sexual immorality taking place within this particular religion. And the dwellers on earth have become drunk with it. They have just flocked to it. They revel in this idea that this false church brings to them. And in verse 3 it says, "And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns." So at some point in time, as the angel is speaking with him, the angel takes him to another place, and there he sees the harlot. And the harlot is sitting on this scarlet beast, right? A scarlet beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns. Well, what is the scarlet beast? The scarlet beast is the Antichrist. Right, we see the Antichrist that is described similarly in previous chapters. The Antichrist here is the beast, and basically they are working together. The Antichrist has a definite role, a definite set of orders that he is trying to carry out. And so he will do whatever it is, whatever it takes, in order for it to be carried out, and he will combine forces with this false religion in order to make that happen. So the Antichrist and the prostitute form this bond to carry out, whatever the plan is. Now, what we'll see later on is that the Antichrist turns on the false religion. And I have a theory. Not that one I can really back up, but it's a theory that I have as to why. So this John's taken away in the spirit. He goes into this wilderness, and he sees a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which has full of blasphemous names. So scarlet, red, this color represents royalty. But it also represents the color of blood. And as we know, the Antichrist will spill a lot of blood as the Antichrist reigns on earth. We also see the blasphemous names. The Antichrist, and then we'll talk about it more in just a moment, but will put himself on a pedestal as the Messiah and say, "I'm the chosen one," or "I'm the one that's come to save you," or however you want to phrase that, and basically calls himself God. I mean, he's just blaspheming over and over and over again. So we see that that's what it's talking about, how it's just going to be this blasphemous person that is going to rule and use the prostitute or the harlot in order to get there. So the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and impurities of her sexual immorality. So again, let's just stop there for a second. And again, this description given of the harlot or the prostitute is one that's basically, has the very fine clothing and jewels, and basically to make themselves look authoritative. So we think about the king, right? The king in the medieval days, or the king in like this time period, or Caesar. They were almost always adorned with some type of crown, right, with jewels on it. The clothing was special, very colorful or bright. When we see that in a picture even or in a painting, we're like, oh, we know exactly who's in charge. We know exactly who has the authority. We know exactly who is the king or the queen or the prince or the princess or whatever the case may be. We know who is royalty. So the prostitute's going to do the exact same thing. And again, I'm going to use them as an example, but I'm not saying they're the prostitute because I don't know and no one truly knows. However, the Roman Catholic Church, when we think about priests and the Pope and cardinals and bishops, and when they do Sunday morning mass or when they do special ceremonies, whatever it may be, what do? They put on this clothing, right? Special gowns, and I don't know what you call the things that go over their shoulders and down, and special hats, right? I mean, very, very ornate type clothing. And what does that do? That kind of lifts them up into a higher position. Now, I'm not saying that they're up there going, hey, look at me and how powerful I am, or look, I'm the leader, or whatever. But it does give us this image of if we looked on a stage and we saw all of these people and one of them was dressed that way, we would immediately go, oh, well, that's the one in charge, or that's someone who is special. And that's what the prostitute does, puts on this clothing, this jewelry, the whatever, to basically lift herself up as someone that is special, in charge, um, you know, deity maybe almost, right? And that's why we see that description there. And what is she holding but a golden cup full of admonitions and the impurities of her sexual immorality? Hey, here's my cup, come drink of it. We see that in examples in the Old Testament where, the accusation of you're getting drunk off of this person or you're getting drunk off this thing. It wasn't wine, it wasn't a literal sense, but it was just that you have become so focused on this one thing that you just let yourself go. You let your wisdom go. You let your right mind go. You let go of anything remotely that makes sense because you're just enamored by this thing. And I bet almost if we thought back in our lives, at some point there was something that we felt that way about. Again, for some people it's sports, for some people it's a thing, maybe it's a special kind of vehicle, or maybe it's a home, or maybe it's a certain place that you wanted to live, and maybe it's a certain place in town that you wanted to live, or maybe it's being in a social group of some kind, right? I mean, we all have this thing. And for the people that follow the prostitute, they're just drinking out of her cup and they've lost all common sense and wisdom and they're just blindly following the prostitute. Now, I'll also say this. I use the term her because it does call this person a harlot and a prostitute. We typically associate that with a woman. The Antichrist is referred to as he. So I'm going to use those pronouns because that's just the way to describe them. Doesn't mean that the prostitute is a woman necessarily, but I feel like probably in some way, shape, or form it is because of the fact they use the word harlot and prostitute. But again, maybe it's a plurality of leadership. Maybe it's a bunch of women and men. Maybe there's not just one person that is being described here. Maybe this is like the entire false religion or church. Next up, verse 5. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. So let's just talk briefly about Babylon. To really understand the role of Babylon in the future, you really got to understand the role of Babylon in the past. And Babylon, was a great place of influence for religion. And, we look at Genesis and the Tower of Babel. What was the purpose of that? The purpose of that tower was to build this tower up to heaven, right? Basically, it was God's creation showing, hey, we're just as powerful. We can get there. We're just going to build this big tower made of brick, right? And eventually, what did God do? God destroyed it. God separated all the people. He gave them all different tongues. That is, he gave them all different languages to speak, so they couldn't understand each other. Um, and he destroyed that. And in the same way, he's going to destroy this religion as well. But Babylon, the great mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. I mean, we know that the Babylon area is going to be a big part at the end of times. It's right off the river Euphrates. The speculation that that is where the Antichrist will put himself as a matter of influence and of deity. And so it becomes, again, many feel like this great place where it'll be a center of influence for the entire world once again, as it once was, again, if we study the Old Testament. And then in verse 6, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And again, this false religion is going to be all about persecution. And again, as believers, it's hard for us to wrap our minds around that here in this country, in the United States, because we don't face that type of persecution, although we are facing some persecution, but not on a physical level as much as a mental level or a societal level. But eventually it is going to get to the point where if we defend our faith, we're defending our faith knowing that death may be coming. In the same way that Paul was defending his faith, knowing that death may come, the apostles were defending their faith, knowing death may come. I mean, it's just a possibility. And we're going to get to that point again, and we're almost there, actually, I think. I really do. I just think things are happening so quick and so fast. And I believe that the United States has become this great influencer of ungodly things. And I say that because just recently, in the past week, there have been 2 sports figures that have come out as either homosexual or transgender, which essentially is homosexual. One plays football, American football. The other plays soccer or European football. The one that plays European football is, I believe, a Japanese-born player. And she now lives in the United States, if I read that story correctly. But because she lives in the United States, because of everything that's happened in the United States, she felt like she could finally come out and say that she's transgender. And so when I say I believe that the United States is becoming this great influence around the world, when it comes to sinful things, I truly believe that. Now, it's not to say that there aren't bad influences in other countries and other parts of the world, but definitely we could say that about the United States. People start to refer to us as Sodom and Gomorrah. Is it possible the United States is really kind of Babylon in disguise? Maybe. I don't know. But this false religion that's developing and that will develop and that will take over is someone that is going to persecute the Christians in the same way that the Antichrist will, in the same way that all non-believers will at some point in time. So now we're going to get into not just this one world religion, but now we're going to get into how does the Antichrist essentially take over that religion. And this is where my theory is going to come in just a moment. So, continue on with verse 6. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. Now, what does he mean by that? He's questioning things like he doesn't understand. Like, here's this woman is sitting on the beast, and I thought the beast was the Antichrist. But if the beast is the Antichrist, then who's the woman really? And is the woman in charge? Like, John's questioning what's going on. So the angel asked this rhetorical question. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. So the angel basically says, I don't know why you're worried about not understanding, because I'm going to tell you what you're looking at. So the angel then says, the beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to the destruction. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the Lamb book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and it is to come. So let's stop a second and try to figure out, what is the angel saying when the angel says things like, the the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise. And then again, that same angel says, because it was and is not and is to come. The angel is in referring to the Antichrist. The Antichrist comes onto the scene. The Antichrist kind of takes over as this leader of the world. And at some point in time, something happens to the Antichrist. And we believe some type of head wound or an appearance of a head wound. The appearance that the Antichrist dies, and then the Antichrist, what happens? Rises again. So when we see the angels say things like was, is not, and is to come, the Antichrist was, but now is not. The Antichrist was living, but then appeared to die, and then is to come, that is to rise again. So the Antichrist rules, dies, and is brought back to life. At least that is the perception that is given to the inhabitants of the earth. So then in verse 9, well, I'm going to go back again. The angel also says that the world will marvel to watch this take place. So the Antichrist does what appears to be a Christ-like thing, right? By dying and then rising again after dying. When the world sees this, the world is going to marvel at it, right? Like, oh my gosh, look what just happened. This has to be God. All this bad stuff that's been going on around us and all the death and destruction, that must be Satan. This must be God. And so they marvel at the Antichrist who was, is not, and now has come or risen. Verse 9, this calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. So again, let's stop there. So the angel's like, okay, now listen, you're going to need some wisdom and understanding here, but the 7 mountains on which the woman is seated, right? Well, what are the 7 mountains? So immediately what some people do is they go to Rome. Rome has 7 mountains that are around it. This must be Rome. I don't believe it is, and here's why. This is why I also don't believe it's the Roman Catholic Church that's leading the charge, although they could and may have a big part in it. I don't believe that's what it's talking about, because we know that the woman has great influence over all the world. We know that the woman is seated on all of the water. That means, again, great influence all over the world, rules all over the world, or has this religion all over the world. If we take those 7 mountains and put it in one specific place, then how does that jive with the other parts of it? It doesn't. So there's a bigger meaning to this that we don't quite understand maybe, but it's not the 7 mountains that are just around Rome. There is something else at play here. And I'll tell you one of the things that was in my commentary. Those 7 mountains refer to the 7 different people groups that have ruled the world. So let's move forward in verse 10. And there are also 7 kings. Or there are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has yet to come. Sorry, I lost my place. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. So, 7 mountains, 7 kings. 7 kings refer to the 7 different people groups that have ruled the earth, and then were gone. For instance, Assyria, at one point in time, ruled the world and then was gone. The Romans ruled the world, then they were gone. The one that has yet to be defeated is this harlot, this prostitute. And the one that is coming for a little while is in reference to the Antichrist. So 5 have fallen, 1 is currently, but will fall soon. And the 7th one, the last one, will take over, but just for a little while. Remember, the Antichrist is only in charge for 7 years, right? And then 3.5 years in, that's when Antichrist dies and then is brought back to life. Supposedly, perception-wise, that's what people think. So, verse 11, and as for the beast that was and is not, It is an eighth, but it belongs to the seven, and it goes to the destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. So we have the beast that is going to assume this great power, again, for a little while as the eighth ruler, but not really, it's the seventh ruler. Right? So the Antichrist is the seventh ruler. The Antichrist dies and then is risen again and takes over again. So it's not the eighth, it really is the seventh. And as that seventh ruler, he will have these territories, these kings that will rule with him, underneath him. Right? These are the 10 kings of the world, the 10 rulers of the world that are left. And what I find interesting is that they are only there for an hour. Now, is that an actual hour? No, that is not a literal sense, I don't believe. That is really the kings who are going to be helping the Antichrist in Armageddon. So they only rule for a small time period. So think of the Antichrist rules for just a little while. The kings are even smaller than that. Because what happens is that the Antichrist will eventually take over all everything. So beyond political and societal, but also the false religion that exists as well. And we're going to get into that in just 1 second. And then again, I'll give you my theory as to how that takes place. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. So in other words, these kings hand over their power and authority to the beast. Again, the beast to everyone in the world looks like deity, it looks like God, looks like Jesus, the Messiah, because he died, and the perception is that he was brought back to life again. They're all bowing down to him, right? They think this is the person that's going to save them from all the death and destruction that has been going on in the world and will continue to go on in the world, and will be the one that leads them to victory over God. Right? That's what they're thinking. So they're bowing down to him. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with whom are called the chosen and faithful. So again, we're looking forward to chapter 19 when Christ returns. Where this is a break in between the 7 bowls and the return of Christ. We're getting some background, if you will, and some things are going to help us understand what's going to be happening here very, very soon. But those kings, the Antichrist, are all going to fight against God and against Jesus Christ, but they're going to lose. And John reminds us of that. In verse 15, and the angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. Again, I've already kind of explained that. The prostitute sits on the waters and has great influence and great charge over everything. In verse 16, and the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. Now that's like, wow, that is very crazy, right? Because the Antichrist and the prostitute or the harlot, they're working together, but all of a sudden the change takes place. And why? Here's my theory. It's always been the plan that that's going to take place. Now, the harlot may not know that, the prostitute may not know that, but the Antichrist knew that that was part of the plan. Like, he has this partnership just long enough to be able to take over. So when the world looks now at the Antichrist, who is supposed to be risen, right, and they would view him as God and deity, that is the cue for the Antichrist to take over. Now, my theory is that maybe the Antichrist either makes it look like that the false religious church in this day and time had something to do with his possible destruction and death, or maybe they actually did, right? So maybe someone from this false church tried to kill the Antichrist. But at some point in time, somehow, the Antichrist gets all of these worshipers of this false religion to turn against that false religion, to destroy that false religion, and then turn their attention on the Antichrist so that the Antichrist can be worshipped. And this is what Satan wants. Satan wants to be worshipped because he wants to know, because he believes that he is as good, if not better, than God. He believes that. Knowing everything that he knows, that he has seen, he still believes that, and that's what he's trying to accomplish. And at the end of time, that's what's going on. He's working through the Antichrist, through the false prophet, in order to be God. The Antichrist turns on the false religion, burns it to the ground, and now everyone worships the Antichrist and will worship the image of the Antichrist, and they will take on the mark of the Antichrist. Remember, they're all drunk with the prostitute's wine. They're just blindly following. And now they see something miraculous and amazing happen, and now they're going to follow the Antichrist. So, verse 17. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. So again, God uses everyone for his purpose. And this, I've heard this debate. Well, God doesn't use evil people for his purpose. He absolutely does. Absolutely uses evil people for his purpose. Pilate was an evil person, and God used Pilate for his purpose. Right? Judas. Jesus knew what Judas was going to do. God knew what Judas was going to do. And they used him for that purpose. God uses evil people to carry out his plan. He is God. He can do whatever he wants. We as believers who choose to follow Christ open ourselves up to God, and we open ourselves up to doing what he asks and being obedient to him, and so that we can be a part of that plan as well, but to be part of that plan in a good way, not in an evil way. God uses all people of all types to carry out his plan. His plan is going to happen regardless of you, regardless of me, regardless of anyone. God's plan will get carried out. And so he places on their hearts to be of one mind. That is, we all think the same way, we all feel the same way, we all gladly give over our authority to the Antichrist for him to do whatever he feels is necessary. They all bow down to him. And so they bow down to him, they give him all the authority, and God's will is being fulfilled. And then the woman that you saw in the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth, the great city being Babylon. Now, is this a physical location of Babylon? Many theologians believe so. But at least in that area. Now, keep in mind, Jerusalem is also referred to as the great city. Is it possible? Is it possible? Absolutely, it's possible. It's very much possible that the great city that's being talked about is Jerusalem. Now, does that mean that the Jewish people are part of this false religion? I don't know. I don't believe so, but it's possible. We do see a great amount of Jewish people come to know Christ in the latter days, and other people come to know Christ in the latter days. But who all is involved, we just don't know it all. But we can at least read, and we can see how all these things begin to play out. And then if we compare that to today's, what's happening in today's society and in today's world, and we can really grasp the thought or the process of how this really plays out. How can something become a religion and have this much influence? Have you ever heard of Scientology? A totally made-up religion, made up, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? And now it has all of these followers. Many of them are what? They are great influencers, mainly in Hollywood, but politics too. It is so possible and feasible that it will happen, and if we're not paying attention, it'll happen without us even knowing it. So, for us as believers, it's important for us to study the Word, to understand what's happening in our society, around our world, know what to pray for, know what we're fighting up against, and to press on and press forward and to do what we need to do so that God's plan is carried out. But keep in mind, that this plan that we're studying in Revelation gets carried out regardless of what we do. However successful we are in reaching people with the gospel of Jesus Christ, however successful each individual church is, or how many people start to come to know Christ, it doesn't matter. This plan gets carried out. This isn't like, Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham was like, hey, if we can find one good person or 10 good people or 100 good people, no. This plan gets carried out. A new kingdom is coming. What was old will be made new again. So this is happening. Okay. Of course, we're all going, when? We don't know, but it is going to happen. So, again, questions, pastorg72@gmail.com. Private message me from our church Facebook page. You can private message me on my personal Facebook page. If you have my phone number, you can text me or call me. Here to answer any and all questions. But 17, we're done with. Next week is 18. Next week is more about the political and societal type of things that we'll see taking place. And again, we'll make some comparisons to what's happening today, because it's all happening really, really, really fast. And we're so close to the return of Christ. I truly believe that. I truly do believe that we're really, really close to the return of Christ. But again, who knows? Could be another 1,000 years from now. I don't know. But I really believe we're closer than that. All right. So thanks for joining me. Have a great week. I hope to see you Sunday at the Bridge Worship Service. And just stay tuned where that's going to be. Hopefully air conditioning's fixed by then, but if not, we have an alternate. And actually, we'll be meeting in my wife's office. So just stay tuned, and we'll keep you updated, okay? So everyone have a great night, and we will see you Sunday. God bless.